Guys, today is the day! The time has finally come! After literally years of delays and reshoots and PR nightmares and review embargoes and ratioed trailers and controversies from everyone under the sun, whether they were involved with the movie or not, it's finally time for Snow White, baby! And I'm just as excited to see it as you are to watch me review it! And I mean, sure, the amount of negative buzz surrounding this movie is enough to have Walt Disney rolling in his grave and turn Bob Iger's hair white, assuming dealing with Kathleen Kennedy hasn't done that to him already. But you know what? Screw that. I'm not worried. We've heard so many horror stories about this movie by now, it almost has to be BS. They couldn't possibly be true. There's just no way the movie is that bad. And even if it is, so what? So what? In the last few months alone, I've made it through Agatha All Along, Kraven the Hunter, and Captain America Brave New World. I've endured every single piece of god-awful, mind-numbing crap that Hollywood has thrown at me and come out the other side more resilient than ever. There is nothing, I repeat, nothing Snow White can dish out that I can't take. After I made it through the fires of Velma and the Marvels and the Crow 2024 and Madam Freaking Web, is Snow White really gonna be the one to put a chink in my armor? Not gonna happen. So if you think for 1 second that I'm gonna be broken by just another half-baked, agenda-driven, soulless cash grab live-action remake of an animated Disney classic, then you, my friend, are the biggest crack-smoking, glue-sniffing, lead paint chip-chewing ignoramus that I have ever... Wow. I can't think of another film in recent memory that's had more working against it than Snow White. Whether it was the movie's titular star coming down with a case of foot-and-mouth disease so severe we're still talking about it years later.
Weird.
Or Peter Dinklage screwing over the film, not to mention his contemporaries in the vertically challenged talent pool who had hopes of scoring a high-profile gig when he convinced Disney to change the film to Snow White and the 7 nightmarish CG abominations lest they endure yet another PR backlash the movie didn't need, or endless rounds of costly reshoots which seem to accomplish nothing but ballooning the film's budget so much that its chances of making a profit are about on par with that of Marvel's latest cinematic effort, or the film's other lead actor, and the only one with a favorable public image until recently, making politically charged comments that are bound to piss off a lot of people in the audience that Disney was no doubt hoping to stay on the good side of.
That escalated quickly.
Or any one of a dozen other problems, or a combination of all of them, God help those poor bastards, this movie's chances of not making Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny look halfway decent by comparison were pretty much DOA before it ever hit the screen. I don't think there was a single person who had a good impression of this thing going in, but all that damage could have been at least a little bit mitigated if it had just somehow, some way, managed to be a good film. But despite Disney doing a hard rollout of shill critics in the last week or two in a transparent and desperate attempt to convince us otherwise, I think we all knew that wasn't what we were in for. Right out of the gate, it's pretty clear that this is not gonna go well. The film begins with a 10-minute exposition dump where the entire backstory gets narrated to us, beginning with a laughable reimagining of Snow White's origin, concocted for the sole purpose of explaining away why her skin is in fact not as white as snow, maybe they should have called her No White to avoid confusion, and culminating with a cringe-fest musical number, the first of many I'm afraid, in which Snow White's parents explain to their daughter, and to the audience in case we weren't getting the message, that she is fearless and fair and true and just and amazing and awesome and wonderful and it goes on like that.
Oh, bitch, get out the way. Get out the way, bitch, get out the way.
And it doesn't get better after this. Not the most elegant segue ever, but let's talk about the music first. Admittedly, I'm not a fan of musicals, but these were tough to get through. The classic songs come off better. Hi Ho would be pretty good if the Seven Dwarfs didn't look like the stuff nightmares are made of. And Whistle While You Work comes close to landing, even though that one is kind of tainted by them using it as a backdrop for Snow White making the Seven Dwarfs clean up their own damn house after they were nice enough to hide her from the evil queen and give her free room and board. But not all the original numbers make the cut. Obviously, a strong female character singing about true love is not something something modern audiences can be subjected to, so Someday My Prince Will Come, that's gone. And for the record, so is the prince that song is about. He's been replaced by some new rando who's not very good. And of course, it's standard operating procedure with these remakes to throw some new songs in there, and wow. The songwriting for these things is hit and miss, though they're all pretty cringy, but it's not just that. These sequences show just how out of his element the director Mark Webb was. If you're doing a musical, you need a director with a vision who really knows how to stage these things in a dynamic, cinematic way. Someone like a Rob Marshall. Say what you will about the Little Mermaid remake, but Marshall shot the hell out of those musical numbers. Or at least the ones he cared about. But here, it's as if they have the blocking of a stage play. There's nothing interesting or imaginative about them. There's no visual flair, it's just people walking around the set and singing. Frankly, most of them are boring to look at, and sorry not sorry, they're not much fun to listen to either. I swear, it is distracting how much they auto-tuned Rachel Zegler during these things. Her voice sounds so fake and artificial and overly produced, she might as well be lip-syncing, which is really weird because we've seen in other movies that Rachel Zegler actually can sing. Love her or hate her, she has a good voice. I think she could have pulled off these songs without much trouble, but for some reason they made her sound like her voice belongs to somebody else, while at the same time leaving Gal Gadot, the one who really needed her voice to be juiced up in post, to fend for herself. So yeah, the musical numbers just weren't doing it for me. And on top of those other reasons, I think a lot of it has to do with the casting. There was just no getting around this. You've got a character like Snow White who's all about innocence and grace and love and kindness, being played by one of the most obnoxious loudmouths in Hollywood, who recently stated that she hopes certain members of the audience never find peace. And then there's the evil queen, a character whose whole thing is being jealous of another woman's beauty, being played by one of the most beautiful women in the world. So casting against type? That's a thing. Do you see how ass backwards it all is? When Snow White is talking about love and showing kindness to the people of the kingdom, it comes off as phony and disingenuous as you could imagine, while unsurprisingly, the song where she's the most engaged is one giant self-congratulation where she's singing about how amazing she knows she can be. Meanwhile, Gal Gadot's cover girl good looks have thrown the whole fairest of them all thing so out of whack that they literally had to change the meaning of fairest just so the story can work.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
Well, sort of. They did and they didn't. And this is where the movie gets really confused, because the queen is still all about being the most beautiful, but when they say fairest of them all in relation to Snow White, it means being the most just and kind and shit. So fairest basically has two separate meanings here, and the movie keeps getting its wires crossed about which meaning they're going with at any given time. And they do eventually settle on the just and kind thing, but then the queen's jealousy of Snow White really doesn't make sense anymore. I'm jealous of you because you're more kind than I am? What the f is that? At that point, the queen's whole motivation is bullshit, and she's just evil because the plot says so. And that's a good place to transition into the biggest problem with the movie, and I mentioned this in the trailer reaction video. The filmmakers were so obsessed with fixing the classic story, or improving it, or updating it for modern audiences, and in the process, they twisted it into something so different from the original that many of the classic elements of the story don't make sense now. They stand out, and not in a good way. And it's so awkward because it's really obvious that they didn't care about the classic elements and had no qualms with changing them whenever they thought they could get away with it. But there are also times when the movie will bend over backwards to half-heartedly include those things, but only because it's not Snow White if you don't have them. So certain things from the classic story might be in there technically, but they're really stupid now. They're different, or not as important as they should be, or weirdly convoluted because they don't mesh with this modern retelling garbage, but you can't exactly take them out because if you do that, then it's not Snow White anymore. Like the Seven Dwarfs, for example. They're in the movie because they have to be, but they basically do nothing. Calling them window dressing in the third act would be really generous. And there are other times when the film will be going in a certain direction, a new direction, and then completely derail itself doing something incredibly stupid because they have to include this thing from the original at that point, which they're very obviously only including because the ghost of Walt Disney is forcing them to. The entire Poison Apple subplot is like that. They with the narrative so much that the poison apple thing makes no sense at all now. In fact, it comes off like a hard left turn away from the story they were telling, and it grinds the pacing of the movie to a screeching halt. If you just think about it for 5 seconds, that plot is fucking idiotic now because of what they've done to it. And you know they didn't even want that in the movie and were probably forced by the studio to add it back in during reshoots because it feels like this really out-of-place side quest that forces the film to awkwardly switch gears and then awkwardly switch back as soon as it's over. And also because there's this new plot they added in there that happens earlier, which basically accomplishes the same thing as the poison apple story, only it gels a lot more with all these modern updates they did. So they basically did the same plot twice, and the classic version of it is the one that feels like it doesn't fit. And you know what? I'm gonna drop some spoilers on you right here. Who the hell cares? You shouldn't watch this thing anyway, but you need to know how dumb the poison apple story is now. We've just found out that the queen murdered Snow White's father, the king. She also has not Prince Charming locked up in her dungeon, knowing that this dude cares about Snow White. Snow White is the only threat to the queen staying in power, so she does the poison apple thing, putting her in the enchanted sleep on the condition that true love's kiss can wake her up. So she has to know that the guy in her dungeon is the only person who might be able to break the spell. So to get Snow White out of the way, she uses this spell that can easily be broken by this dude who, it turns out, can escape her dungeon so fucking easily it's downright silly. I mean it, you will facepalm really fucking hard during his escape scene. It's so dumb. But if Snow White is the only threat to the queen, and this dude is the only one who can wake her up, then all the queen has to do is kill Snow White or kill this dude, and she wins. And we know she's more than willing to kill people to get what she wants because she's done it before. So instead of the poison apple plan, wherein the good guys still have a solid chance to win, why doesn't the queen just kill Snow White or kill this dude? She very easily could have killed both of them, and she's obviously willing to do so, and there's literally no fucking reason why she doesn't do it, except that it's not what happened in the original. So the filmmakers were really focused on doing this new version of Snow White where they updated the classic story and made it better, but they also had to use stuff from the classic story because the studio said so, I guess, and they did it all so badly and so clumsily that the end result is both versions suck now. Do you see what I'm getting at here? The poison apple plot is asinine in this movie. The story would actually make more sense without it. It's not even good in a vacuum because this dude has only known Snow White for like a day and a half at that point, so the true love thing comes off like bullshit because they obviously never cared about that part.
It's really not about the love story at all, which is really, really wonderful.
And then, much like the Seven Dwarfs, not Prince Charming does nothing for the rest of the movie. And he didn't do anything interesting before this either. Now, I'm not saying he needed a huge role. He didn't. It's not his story. But if you're gonna put him in this spot, at least make it worthwhile. Him and Snow White have this really flat, cliched bickering rom-com thing going on, even though they have no chemistry whatsoever. 5 minutes later, they kind of like each other, and then suddenly they're in love. Because if they're not, then the true love's kiss thing doesn't work. If you say so, movie. The most unconvincing thing in the film. Frankly, the entire poison apple story is a nothing burger now. You could cut that whole plot out of the movie, leave not Prince Charming locked up in the dungeon, and nothing about the story would change. It would still end the exact same way. If anything, cutting that out might make the story better. It would absolutely make the pacing better. That's how little they cared about it. And believe you me, they cared about the climax of the movie even less. The climax genuinely feels like everyone involved in the making of this film, from the screenwriters to the producers to the gaffers to the boom operators all the way down to the goddamn PAs, just fucking gave up. More spoilers here, but it, there isn't much to spoil. Snow White says, "This will not be easy." She says this. And then she overthrows the evil queen so fucking easily, I almost thought it was a joke. She literally just walks back into the kingdom and, without uttering one single word, mind you, all the people of the kingdom fall in step behind her, even though they haven't seen her in like 10 years and had supposedly forgotten she existed. That's actually a story point, by the way. Then she marches up to the evil queen in her castle full of armed guards with no plan and says, "Give us our kingdom back." That's it. That's it, that's her mic drop. Give us our kingdom back. And then when the queen orders the guards to kill this idiot, Snow White is like, hey dudes, remember when things were better than this? And the guards are like, you know? Come to think of it, things were a lot better before this evil bitch showed up. Then the queen dies, Snow White wins, and that's it. That's the end of the movie. There's no storming of the castle, no lightning strike and falling off a cliff, no dueling musical number with Ziegler and Godot. Nothing exciting or even interesting happens at all. Snow White says, this will not be easy, and then the plot twists itself into a pretzel like a goddamn contortionist to let Snow White win as easily as anything I've ever seen in a movie. This climax was so f***ing embarrassing, it made me think I owe The Crow 2024 an apology. I don't know if I've ever seen a big budget studio movie that had fewer shits to give about its own ending. The only explanation that makes sense to me is that the money ran out with about 10 pages left to shoot, and then they were like, well, it, we gotta end this thing somehow. What can we afford to do? Nothing? Okay, let's do that then.
It's Hollywood, baby.
Which really blows my mind. You'd think they would have allocated a certain amount of cash for this because the third act of a movie is usually pretty important. But no, apparently not. And that's another big problem. This entire movie looks like the filmmakers had no idea where the budget should go. There are some sequences that look like they were just throwing money at the screen, covering every single goddamn pixel with some of the worst CG you'll see in a movie this year. And then there's other parts that look so freaking cheap, it almost does feel like a stage play. All the kingdom sets around the castle, terrible. Looks more like a Disney park set than a lived-in village. The sets inside the castle look like the set decorator took the day off. And it doesn't even look good when they do spend money on it. The CG forest animals somehow look more fake and more cartoonish than the ones in the cartoon movie that came out like 88 years ago, and the CG forest looks just as bad. Clearly, they wanted to make these things look intentionally animated, but they also have to interact with the live action elements and the live action actors, and when that happens, it all just looks f***ing fake. And the seven dwarfs? Jesus Christ. They are straight up horrifying. Just one look at those cold, lifeless digital faces that the filmmakers obviously thought were so cute and adorable made me want to turn away from the screen. They're genuinely uncomfortable to look at. I don't know what the hell these people were thinking. So there are parts of this movie that look like there was no money spent on them at all, and other parts where they clearly spent way too much money only for it to still look like crap. Good God, just put that money into some decent practical sets and costumes and actors that don't exist entirely in computers, and you could have easily avoided this whole fiasco. Idiots! Even without all the controversies, Snow White would still be a train wreck the likes of which we rarely see in Hollywood. The fact that this was the result of them trying to remake the beloved classic that put the entire company on the map, Disney is not going to live this one down for a very long time. I can't believe there's now a bigger indictment on how far Disney has fallen in recent years than Wish, but here we are. If this doesn't convince the studio that they need to get their act together, I don't know if anything will. Snow White is a black mark on the careers of everyone involved in making it. It's boring, sloppy, poorly written, poorly paced, has mediocre, uninspired direction, and isn't fun to look at or listen to. It fails as a remake, it fails as a film that has to stand on its own, and it made me bald. I can't even see their target audience of little girls and their families enjoying this thing. So if you've got kids who, for whatever reason, thought the trailers didn't look like hot garbage, just sit them down in front of the original instead. You'll save money, and they'll probably thank you for it later. Thanks so much for watching. While you're here, ding that bell icon and follow all of my social media so you can always be notified when I upload new stuff. The links are down there. And this channel is a one-man operation. I do all this stuff myself, so help me out by smashing that like button, sharing the video, subscribing if you haven't already, and making sure you're still subscribed, because what really deserves to eat a poison apple and be put into an enchanted sleep for all eternity is the YouTube algorithm. That's all for now. I'll be back with more soon. Take care, stay tuned. I'll see you next time.